Hi, Pete Tom.
How you doing, Pete?
The Apple Vision Pro is coming out in February, and one of the things that it advertises as one of its strengths, or it is built upon, is spatial computing. And I saw a recent article that you put on LinkedIn regarding spatial computing. Your opinion was that the Apple Vision Pro does not really use spatial computing, and you gave various reasons why. I just wondered if you could give me an outline of why you see it differently.
Sure. So the understanding that I have, what they're promoting, is that spatial computing is computing that happens in the space around you, which is they've taken traditional computing and they've assigned it places that you can perceive it. So you've got screens that instead of being on your laptop or on your phone or on your iPad, now those same applications have been unburdened from the glass and are now around you, but they're still flat. They're still just glass, and they're still just screens. They're just virtual screens instead. And to me, that's not an introduction of spatial computing at all. That's still two-dimensional computing, just as if you were holding up the glass. All it means is your arms don't get tired. So it gives us more real estate, but it hasn't introduced a new paradigm other than a new way of perceiving what we're already doing. It's not really groundbreaking.
Okay, so when we discussed this earlier, we're still thinking in coordinates, and everything that I understood from spatial computing, you said, you're still thinking in terms of where things are in VR and the things you see around you in your virtual reality experience or mixed reality experience. What are the additional sort of factors or concepts that you would add to, how would you change the definition of spatial computing? And again, maybe just a sort of 1 minute overview for someone at my level that needs to build up this knowledge.
Sure. So my contention, especially in the article, was that spatial computing is when we use the space itself as an element of computation. When items and how they relate to each other, how they connect to one another, and how they move in that environment have space. Adding one to another, or saying that this relates to that, or moving a token from place to place, these are now programs that have meaning as we convey this. So that if we gesture towards something, that gesture has meaning, the thing that we've gestured toward takes action. Those kinds of things are spatial computing, when items, objects, and places and actions and relationships have been moved out into it. And it's not just panes of glass that we click on in a different place that have been shifted slightly.
Yeah, because, I was just going to say, because ultimately they are pixels that are presented to us, whereas you're talking about things being given meaning that exist independent of a viewer's perception. Is that that's what you're describing? That potentially change over time and understand interactions with each other, and there are consequences to those things being in different places within a space as we would recognize it. Is that
it is
the kind
exactly
of thing you're talking about?
But also with two additional dimensions. So right now, computers, they give us our X and our Y coordinates in terms of where things are put on a screen. And now we've added a Z coordinate to that gives us a place in the environment around us. But that's not the only ways that humans even think of that space. So we don't just want where something is, we want where something is when. So our ability to not only put something in a place, but to rewind that space that changes that goes back to an earlier configuration. So not only where the objects were at an earlier time, but what state they were in. So we want basically an infinite undo to be able to go back to an earlier point on a timeline to remember something, or to not lose something, to undelete a file, to preserve something that had been lost previously, or something that had been broken, or to get an earlier copy after we have changed our mind about a draft. So that undo, that timeline, that's part of how we conceive of the state of the world. So time is important.
So just whilst you were saying that, I was thinking almost Like, imagine we're thrown into a car and we've never driven before. We don't even know how the world behaves around us. We're now presented with objects and shapes that are moving, and we have no idea of the consequence of interacting with those objects and shapes. However, when we were a baby growing, we started to understand that objects had consequence. There's the floor, there's a brick that's on the floor, there's a plastic toy that's on the floor. And as we get older, we understand the consequence of certain objects meeting other objects in terms of, say, in a car, for example. Is that that's what you're talking about in terms of understanding, in terms of the computer being able to understand consequence? Am I getting that right?
That could be part of it, but this is decoupled from a physical meaning, because we're also talking about virtual objects. So I should be able to take a copy of you and move it into my future timeline as a way of saying, I'm going to do something with you. I'm going to do what with you? Well, that future timeline is also part of my email or part of my calendar. So I say I've got an appointment, or I need to send you a message or have a call or a meeting, but I've moved it into my future. I've used my imagination along this timeline just as well as I can use my memory along the timeline. So meaning of object and place, some of it is physical, or some of it can be borrowed from the physical, but some of it can be assigned. So that brick that you say, that item has weight. Well, what do we want to attach to that weight, or to the meaning of where it is in place? Is it a reminder? Is it supposed to hold something down? Is it meant to represent solidarity or commitment, or a promise that I've made to myself that's unbreakable? Any of these attributes that I could imbue it with, or it could just be, I like the color or texture of it. Right.
So, or it could be, what does weight actually mean? What are the consequences of weight? So, going back to the definition of spatial computing, does that mean that you personally discount that definition, that you're saying, look, that simply is not?
Yes. At the same time, I'm going to be filed under old man yells at cloud. Right. This is pretty meaningless for me to be making this quibble, because Apple is throwing money at it and they're going to be branding it that way. And it's the term that's going to be stamped on everybody's spatial computing expert profile inside the next 6 months. The term is going to persist, but I want to broaden the mindset into what the technology unlocks. Now, we need the on-ramp that the Apple Vision Pro provides. We need people to take what they're used to on this 2D coordinate plane and put it up and realize that, once it's off of this, once it's out in the wild, I don't need it even to be on this pane of glass. I can break this paradigm and I can be free of these borders. And now I can take these ideas and move them into my world, have them interact with and be part of, and begin blending my digital and my physical, and combine meaning and environment and space.
So, but do you think that will actually happen?
I don't know how soon it will happen, but it absolutely will. It probably won't happen until the younger cohort, the kids who grow up with the ideas of VR, who already don't care about these boundaries. When they grow into creative positions and they don't need the pane of glass crutch, they are the ones who will invent the new languages, the new terminology, the new vocabulary that creates a truly mind-blowing sci-fi computing experience that to us looks like Jedi and wizards and spellcasters, but to them looks like, now I got to check my email and do my calendar and next version of spreadsheets and OKRs or whatever.
Yeah. But the only thing I would say to that, could you not apply that argument to the last 40 years, 50 years of computing? So if we look at the 1970s, and then the personal computing becoming more widely available, and then look at the development of Windows as a great example of how realistically we're still loosely in the same place. Are we not? So that's my only concern with what you're saying there, is I wonder if it will happen, or if it's just too much of a big risk, or there simply aren't the people out there who will take the risks or make the leap that you've just described.
Well, we'll make the leap. We'll take those things. They'll come with us. but the transformation will happen. We're not talking about a movement of existing computing only. We're talking about a change that's as big as going from typewriting to computers, going from computers to an XR blended digital physical reality.
Yep.
So I think the change that we're going to see is much larger than old things in a new way. We're going to see some new things.
Because surely there's one, and I'm aware of we're nearly out of time, but there's one other factor, and that is literally the hardware considerations as well. Because what you're describing sounds like computing power would, have to be thrown at that in a sort of almost exponential way, where it just, as you build in the sort of complexities you're talking about, there's an incredible amount of computing power required, surely.
There is. We're going to see some major improvements on that. Some of it will become smaller and more specific when we know what kinds of computing are needed, and we can build heuristics and chips that specialize in that. Some of it will be moving more of that computing off of the headset so that we don't have to carry the weight of it physically. So we will find a blend that enables the experience that we desire. And enough people are going to see the possibilities and desire it. I have no doubt we're going to get there.
So on one final note, and then we'll bring this to a close, where do you see in, let's say, 20 years' time, what's the state of computing and spatial computing as an example in 20 years' time?
20 years' time, I'm actually pessimistic. I think it's going to take us a long time to get to the ubiquitous glasses form factor that more than 50% have it and are beginning to use it to look more through their lenses than at their phones. I just think we have a lot of momentum, a lot of technical improvements to get there. I think that's the 10 to 15 year timeline. The 20-year timeline, I think most physical installed computer hardware is going to be invisible at that point. It's going to be a personal experience that we project into our environments.
It'll be interesting to see how that develops over the next 15, 20 years. And I really appreciate your time. I thank you for breaking that article down.
I'll put you out there and I'll meet you in that 15-year timeline.
Thank you very much for your time. And thank you for breaking that down in a way that certainly I can understand, and hopefully the people watching this can understand. Thanks very much. Thanks, Pete.
Well, thank you so much, Pete. Appreciate it.